I think you're right. Recreate the spontaneity of the phone call, and people will like that.
What I wanted to talk about, Randon, is there is a conversation, and it's kind of old now, so I think that, you might have probably come across it already, and a lot of people probably have come across it already. This Mind the Game podcast that LeBron, I guess last year they originally started it with JJ Redick, but now that Redick is his coach, he apparently doesn't have time to be a co-host for this podcast anymore. And they've got the second season with Steve Nash. And one of the episodes they invited Luka Doncic, and the three of them have a very interesting basketball conversation. But I was most engaged during that conversation when they started individually touching on youth sports and what it was like when they were younger versus what they've seen change, which is, obviously right in the wheelhouse of everything we deal with. So if it's okay with you, I wanted to show you a clip of that conversation because I just found it fascinating. We'll just listen to a little bit of it right now. But I wanted to get your reaction to this because I think it falls right into the wheelhouse of everything we've been talking about.
Study really highlights is that, especially in the United States, youth sports has been commercialized.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Youth sports. So this is my way of explaining it. When I grew up, you play soccer and hockey in the winter, you play baseball, box lacrosse in the summer, and it costs you like $100 a season for each sport. Well, some entrepreneur, someone says, well, I need to make a business of this, said, well, if I can sell the dream to the family, the little Sarah or Johnny, they might have a chance to go somewhere with this, but they got to commit to this sport for the year at 6, 7, 8.
That's the worst thing you can do.
Right.
And you could see their reaction, all of them. You could see their reaction, how they react to that situation. And I think Steve Nash does a good job explaining it where, when they were younger, and even when you and I were younger, because these are basically our compatriots as far as age goes, how many times do you remember when you were younger, I was younger, we're playing youth sports as kids, unorganized free play, right? We drive by these basketball courts back when we were younger, and not only are there two teams playing hardcore, but there's teams waiting on the side to play winner of the net. And there's like a bunches of teams ready to play. And so, that is how we experience youth sports growing up. And then you'd have significant sports diversification where you've got the season specific for that sport. You'd play on one team, then you rotate over, play an export for the following season. And then you've got like kind of a dark period where in the middle of the summer, you would just basically have some time off and let everything recover before you start again. And Nash does a good job sort of alluding to the fact that, private equity or entrepreneurship or people who wanted to make this into a commercial business have come in and are, figuratively and sometimes literally selling a dream to parents and patients and children and saying, hey, I think so-and-so got what it takes, but you got to do it this way. And you could see on LeBron's face and Luka Doncic's face, they both just kind of eye roll like, my goodness, this is the worst thing you could possibly do. It's so interesting that these high-level Hall of Fame athletes see it the same way. And I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts and perspectives are from a sports medicine position.
I guess I got to ask myself, is it that I don't have a problem with people trying to make money? You know what I mean? Like, I think that's where maybe the conversation should start is just like any other person in the US or the world or whatever, right? Like can start a company and make money. I think that, go do your thing. I think the problem is that we didn't really think through the downstream effects of that, like monetizing the youth sports side. So I totally agree that it's not ideal and we can get into it of why, but I don't have a problem with someone creating a business that makes money for their company or family. But I think at the end of the day, the downstream effects can be, I'll say, harmful. I mean, so I think what happens is you create, maybe the right word is like too much opportunity to play for a very small group of people, right? So, yes, what we need is more opportunity for a very wide group of people who maybe aren't doing competitive sports, but that's not going to be the community, that's not going to be the customer base that's going to pay big money. So if you're running a business, you're not going to focus on them, right? You're just going to focus on the people who can pay. And so I guess that part I would want to address first is like the downstream effects of creating a business, then puts pressure on the people who are willing to pay to be like, I mean, you've seen it. We've had people like, all right, well, I've got the national championship, right? How many people do you come in with the national championship? You're like, there's 40 national championships for flag
Yeah.
football,
Yep.
for in a full year. It's like, come on. So, I mean, that's the first issue I have. I can jump into the others, but would be curious to get your thought on the business side because that New York Times article too came out.
Yeah, that I'm glad you alluded to that. I think we both were aware that the New York Times published an article about private equity's encroachment into youth sports and how they labeled it a $40 billion business opportunity, which, we did not get into medicine thinking about the monetary value and financials of that decision. And we certainly didn't get into pediatrics focusing on what is the business going to look like. And it's not even a secret. I mean, it's just a well-known fact that medical physicians who go through undergrad, medical school, residency, fellowship, we don't really have built into our curriculum specific nuances of how to understand the business, not only our own business of how do we manage finances within the field that we practice in, and we're even less so trained about how to deal with the financial businesses that we interact with. Uh, and so I would agree with you from a philosophical standpoint that I also share your thoughts that I don't have any problem with people trying to create a business out of something that they see opportunities in. And I also agree that I think that we're stepping into some untoward consequences that we weren't anticipating that this was going to cause. I think that some of the more cynical among our field would probably say, I saw this coming from a mile away sort of thing. And sure, hindsight being 2020. And if you've had that premonition, then great. But the voices that were trying to slow things down certainly weren't loud enough. And we're now at a very sort of difficult situation. I kind of draw the comparison to social media. When social media started out in the early 2000s, we kind of didn't know what we were getting into. It all just seemed like some fun games, easy way to connect, stay in touch with people that are across the country. But man, that boomed into some, I just, you can't even live
Yeah,
life now without social
yeah,
media.
true.
So in the same way, it kind of ran away, right? You can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's not like we're going to get rid of social media at this point. And this is kind of the same problem that I had with youth sports commercialization as Nash pointed out. I have many concerns, of course. I think the bottom of the barrel of my concerns is who's making the money. I don't really care who's making the money, but I think the incentives of making the money are causing everything else to go out of whack. And, we could talk point by point, and I certainly want to touch on why we probably agree that this isn't a good idea for the health care of our children. And we'll talk about that for sure. That should probably be a highlight. But one of the things I think I'm really worried about is I just feel like all sports are going to become sort of like a class thing. People are getting priced out of doing anything nowadays. And so I'm really worried that when I first got into medicine, you know, and you, for example, you were my mentor at that time. Even then, sports specialization was already kind of crazy, but I felt like I had a good patient population mix where I had patients who were coming in from inner city who didn't have a lot of resources. Their school district didn't have a lot of resources, but I was still seeing them. I was seeing them in the clinic because they had access to being able to play organized sports. And now it's like if you don't live in a certain zip code that has the equity built within it and the school system built within it geared towards building up an athletic department, you don't even get exposed to sports. And so we've got this complete loss of access to sports to children that otherwise would have really benefited from it. And that's one of the many things that really, really worries me.
But like, just to kind of hammer home the point about like the money side, right? If we own a company and we want to create a tournament, right? So we got to get as many teams as we possibly can, right? We have to run snack bar that makes money, right? We're not providing this high-end food, right? We're going to provide cheap crap that people can eat and we can make money off of that. The t-shirts, the parking. Yeah, we cover tournaments at the this one place in Arizona. You've got to pay to park, then you have to pay to get in the venue. Then on top of that, you cannot bring food into the venue. So I mean, it's just, I mean, that's what you would do if you own the company to make as much money as possible. but that type of experience just seems terrible for the athlete, for the family, whatever it may be. But we can get off the money part of it, but I think like have to talk about that because the number of costs that you would have for an athlete, it just prohibits you from being able to participate. And I realize there's exceptions, but man, like I'm not trying to pay to park, get in, and eat to watch somebody play basketball.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, it's almost like a movie theater paradigm, right? You got to pay all the way through, and you pay for the concessions. And so I agree. I mean, this is not what we thought we were going to be getting into. We've got, we don't have a lot of control over that, and we're going to provide high quality care the best way that we can. But to add to your point, you talked about the business part of it. I'm glad we started with it. I'm glad we're spending some time on it because I think it is the at the core of what we're dealing with. But
And
I would
sorry
say
to
that I had, yeah,
let
go
me
for
just
it.
mention, like, and then we're going to want to do as many tournaments as we can. If me and
Yeah,
you are the tournament
yeah.
directors, right? It's not like, hey, we're going to do one. It's like, no, we want to have something every couple of weeks, right? Like we want to get that's
I
revenue.
mean, every
So,
weekend if we can.
right. And then to maybe jump to the healthcare side of it, right? Like, well, if you're not available, if you're not going to these tournaments and playing and getting
Exactly.
exposure, that's what leads to the issues. So,
Exactly.
so
That
sorry to
is
cut you
that.
off, but
No, no, no. That's exactly where I was going to take this. That is that pernicious sort of like undertow that is so, it's kind of heartbreaking on the provider side to deal with it. Let me give you an example to highlight it. I had a parent earlier this week ask me, like, it's a $40 billion industry. Why are the physicians not profiting from it? And I just looked at him and I said, because the physicians know that this is not quality healthcare. The doctors that are on this side of it know that the opposite of what we're doing actually prevents injury and improves performance. So you're really just paying for a lie. I mean, I got to be honest about it. Like, if you have somebody who runs a tournament, runs a league, and they say to you, little Johnny or Sally needs to do this at the age of 11 every single day for this many weeks and play this many tournaments and not take any time off and not cross train. And that's how we know we're going to set them up for success when they're 18. All of the scientific evidence, although it's primitive, all of the evidence we have so far points in the exact opposite direction. That early sports specialization increases the risk of physical and psychological burnout in all kids, in all sports, and it decreases the ability of them to be able to specialize later and have success. So you're paying for all of this stuff that's on the upfront, and what you're actually paying for is increasing the risk of injury for your child, and you're increasing the risk that they're not actually going to want to keep playing their sport when they're 16, 17, and 18, when it might matter a lot more, because that's going to be more close to their physiological and physical prime. And it's heartbreaking to try to send this message on the other side, because I can see the wheels turning when I'm talking to the patients and parents that what I'm saying in the exam room when I'm diagnosing an overuse injury and guiding them through sports is the exact opposite of what everybody else in their social circle and in their sports circle is telling. I'm imagining that that's also kind of the same perspective you've got going on.
yeah, I mean, there was this old study from UCLA that talked about, I mean, it was early on in the sports specialization kind of hitting the mainstream. And it talked about how many athletes who were D1 at UCLA started playing their sport. And I might be butchering the numbers, but I think it was like high, like 40, 50% did not start playing their sport that they were at UCLA for until they got to high school, right? And I think we're not trying to make the argument that you shouldn't play sports early on and you shouldn't do things that you enjoy, but it's like if at the end of the day that's that amount of exposure leads you to either burnout or injury, then you haven't done yourself justice by, this hardcore dedication to your sport. One question I had as I was thinking through this just now is maybe there's not a right answer, but do you think it's possible for an athlete now to say, hey, I just play football in the fall, basketball in the winter, and let's say track in the spring and take off in the summer? Like, do you believe that athlete will have a legitimate opportunity to play at the next level? Or is it just impossible for them to get to where they need to be because they don't have enough exposure to the sport?
I think that the unfortunate reality is that that athlete, if that's the case that they've set up in terms of their sports participation, from my perspective, they're doing everything right. But from the system's perspective, they're going to get lost in the noise.
Do you think that's a politics issue, like we haven't seen him out there? Or do you think it's just like the other kids will get so far ahead of that athlete? I don't know.
I don't think it's necessarily the case that they're going to fall behind because everybody else is playing more and therefore is better. I think that I ask my patients all the time this question, like, do you want to be great at 11 or do you want to be great at 21? Like,
Hmm.
what matters more? And I think at 11, because of the natural change in development and coordination in most kids, there's some kids that can just really shine at 11 in baseball, in soccer, in basketball, whatever. They're just going to be great at 11. I am not convinced that identifying their talent at 11 and sports specializing them will guarantee that they're going to be great at 21. I actually think the opposite is true. Encouraging them to play multiple sports the way that you just described early on and waiting until at least the mid to late adolescence to sport specialize is going to put them at much better odds of succeeding later on. And to add to your point about whether that athlete that you described is going to be lost in the shuffle due to poor recognition or because they're going to fall behind their peers, I think it's more going to be related to the idea that they're not being recognized from being involved enough. It's almost, and if you correlate that, even though this is kind of a dark secret somewhat, it's more like your parents didn't pay to have you out there enough. That's what the system is. That's the message the system is saying. Like, your parents didn't put in enough money into the system that you qualify for advancing going on. I know that's not, nobody's actually saying that,
Yeah,
but the
yeah.
system is now designed that way. Is like, it's a
But
money in, money out sort of thing.
what do you think about just like you're not committed to the team concept? Like, hey, our team plays year round, whatever. Maybe there's during high school, there's some dark periods or whatever, but like, we need people on this team who are committed to the team, and we can't have you, missing 6 months out of the year. I think that's a real feeling, or I guess concept out there.
I would just have a blunt answer to that, and I'd say that if that's the way the team is being run, it flies in the face of good sports medicine care. It just is not evidence-based. It increases the risk of injury, it increases the risk of burnout, and doesn't lead to better performance later on. And so my short answer to that question is the team can decide whatever they want to do, but if it were up to me, I would make decisions for my patient, or in cases that I'm the parent, I would make decisions for my child that are evidence-based, that protect them in the short term, medium term, and long term, and in the end of the day, improves their ability to be better at a later age, which if they care about that sport and want to take it far, that's what's going to matter a lot more than being better when you're very, very young.
All right, let me give you a scenario, and you tell me how you would respond to that, like, uh, situation. This is totally random, but I've got a 15, 16-year-old defensive back. So let's start, in Arizona, school starts in August. He's been August starting up practices, double sessions, games. His team happens to be good. They go all the way through playoffs. Their last game is around Thanksgiving. Then they get into some winter workouts, lifting, what have you. Spring comes around. They do 7-on-7s, tournaments, obviously, commitment, travel, all that stuff, still training. Then over the summer, they start back with weight training, camp, all that. And then they start back into the season. I guess some people would say, like, what's the problem with that? Maybe even they do some spring track or whatever. What's the
At
problem with that?
15 or 16, that might be okay. It might
Hmm.
be. Depending on their physiological development and their skeletal maturity, 15 and 16 might be okay to run that kind of lifestyle. It's not okay at 11 for pretty much
Hmm.
anybody. It's not okay at 10 or anything younger than that. And that's most of what we're dealing with. If the patient comes in they're 15, 16, sophomore, junior year of high school, and they have this kind of schedule, I'm not happy about it because I think that's still a little early and it's still a little bit too intense at that age. But I'm more accepting that paradigm might be okay for a lot more kids in that age range. I don't think a 12-year-old should be doing that for any sport. And I, I have a brother who is in college now, and is playing golf in college. If I had known what I knew now when he was 5 years old, when my parents gave him his first set of clubs, like, I would have taken the clubs out of his hand and said, you know what, go play baseball, go play this, go play that. And when you're 13, 14, 15, we can start looking more seriously at golf. That doesn't mean don't play golf. It just means do other
Hmm.
stuff with golf. Now he's playing great. I mean, he's achieving his goals. He's doing what he wants to do. So I'm not entirely sure that in that specific scenario, it would have made any better of a difference. I don't know if he would have been better or worse. He didn't seem to have a lot of injuries growing up, but that might be the nature of golf. That might be the one example or one sport where you could talk about this. But on the flip side, I'm seeing golfers all the time living in California that see me maybe once, twice a week that have some pretty serious injuries because the nature of golf has changed. The intensity of golf has changed. Youth sports and golf has changed. It's all about distance, like we talked about before. It matters almost very little in terms of of accuracy. Of course, accuracy matters, but it's all about the drive. It's all about the distance. The swing mechanics have changed from 20 years ago. So even that I'm worried about. You didn't used to be. Now I'm worried about golfers. The system is just not set up to incentivize providing good medical care. And to answer that parent's question who asked me before, like, I can't in good conscience play along with it because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense from the way that we understand pediatric medicine. It doesn't make any sense from the way we understand biomechanics of sports, that to put the young, vulnerable child who has open growth plates through the same repetitive activity over and over and over again and expect no problems and expect success. It doesn't make any sense. And every single year we're seeing a high volume, high load of athletes that are coming in with injuries to vulnerable areas that we have to closely monitor, closely diagnose. I only anticipate this getting worse because the more money we put into it, the greater degree of burnout and physical injuries that we're going to see.
Yeah, I think, going back to the business side, but tying it in, I think what is like, they're selling hope, right? They're selling a dream, an
Yeah, that's what
aspiration,
Nash
right? Like,
said.
and I think that's a real challenge because a good example. So I had a kid, I can't remember exactly the situation, but he was a bigger kid, maybe 6 or 7, and he had a lineman coach. Like he had a position coach for linemen, and like again, I'm all about people like dedicating themselves to something, go out and achieve their goals. But like the first thing I thought is like, well, like he might not be a lineman when he's older. Like, in 10 years from now, he may have a totally different body. So that was just kind of something that stuck with me to
We
try
see
to
that all
think
the
through.
time. We see patients in clinic that are like that. They got position coaches and they've got personal trainers before they're even 12 years old. And, we see it on social media all the time. And you're right. That's exactly the right thing to approach it and say, you don't know what your body's going to look like when you go through puberty and you fully develop. You have no idea what you're going to look like. So it's, we have some idea. We can do some calculations and follow growth charts and get a general idea of what it might be. But people outgrow their genetics frequently. People don't always reach their genetic potential frequently. And you're banking on a lot. In the short term, increased risk of injury and burnout is there. But even if you think that that's going to make you a better lineman when you're 18, we don't know if your body's going to fill out that way that makes that a suitable position for you. And yeah, that's one of the biggest, concerns that I have. And if we listen to this Mind the Game podcast a little later down the line, LeBron touches on this in terms of personal training. And he says, if to his recollection, he didn't have his own personal basketball coach that just worked with him until he was like a second-year player in the league. So we're talking not even high school. He was done with high school by the time he had his own coach. And in high school, he tells a story of how he was a multi-sport athlete. He played football and he played basketball. And he loved football so much that his senior year, he snuck on the football team and kept playing despite his mom's wishes against that. So he was a multi-sport athlete all the way up until he was an NBA player. He was still playing football like right up to when he got drafted. And Luka Doncic kind of alludes to some things a little bit here and there, but what he doesn't really go details into what other sports he played, but what he says is that the ability to play free play when you're young with your friends at the park, where there isn't a coach, there isn't a scheme, there isn't a goal, it's just free play. He really emphasizes the value of that and how that improves your creativity as a player, how that allows you to kind of make mistakes without somebody bringing the hammer down on you, how you can do it your way and your friends aren't really going to pressure you to change it, but a coach might. I mean, I would even buy that at this. If you tell me that I'm going to be a year-round basketball player at 9, but only like 8 months of that is going to be structured and the other 4 months are going to be free play, spatter, I'm good with that. I'll take that at this point. Like, it's the structured tournaments, coaching, you got to play this position and we're going to do it this way. You got to put in this many hours and pay this much money. And I think that this will give you success when you're 15, 16, 17. And then when we can get you into the league. That's the dream. I'm like, look, that flies in the face of the evidence. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make
No,
sense.
I love that. Like I'm embarrassed to say like that concept. I'm just like it's clicking now, right? So say what if the situation is like instead of trying to argue something that we just know people aren't going to do, right? Like saying, "Oh, don't sports specialize, don't do this, don't," people aren't going to do that, right? They're bought in. They want that end goal. They see that as the way to get that end goal. But if we maybe say like, "Look, we're not saying don't do sports. We're just saying like maybe it's not a structured setup, right? Like, hey, 9 months of the year, 8 months out of the year, coaching, whatever, 4 months out of the year, let's just do unstructured, whatever your sport is, whatever you want to be doing. Like maybe there's this epidemic of overcoaching, maybe that's the problem here. And again, I know a lot of coaches are volunteers, a lot give their time. So I do not want to be disrespectful to that, but that's another component to the business side, right? Like that's somebody's job, right? So if the person's job depends on your child playing the sport, then you have to factor that in. That can't be dismissed as this person is here just to be so helpful, right? They're also there to like make money, and the more tournaments you go, maybe there's some backdoor deals where, they bring, coaches to they get a little swag or whatever, little monies to recruit new athletes. So I mean there's a lot to it, but definitely like that concept of, I mean, I knew the concept of free play, but like unstructured sports can be a variation of rest, maybe.
That might be a better way for us to approach conversations with patients and parents at this point. Instead of saying, how many months are you taking off? You might want to say, how many months are you just unstructured free play? How much are you doing that? Can we get a couple of months in where you're doing that? Where I don't mean you have to sit on the couch and do nothing, but get out there with your friends, try some things on the court that you wouldn't otherwise try, that your coaches don't want you to do or wanted you to do a different way. At the end of the day, sports can be an expression of yourself. And I think that's what Doncic was trying to say, is that when we were younger and we were playing on the pickup courts in school playgrounds, a lot of that was like self-expression, right? Getting the energy out, being a kid, experiencing childhood. A lot of that is like the ability to just connect with your friends at that physical level. And I think that resonates across boys, girls, everything. Like, I think that's a natural part of childhood and growing up, the ability to explore and kind of be creative and get to know what works, what doesn't work. That's a quintessential part that's totally lost. I can't tell you how many times I drive by these playgrounds with these immaculate hoops that nobody's touched for months. And every time I drive by, there's nobody playing. There's not even like a parent holding up a little kid, trying to dunk a basketball standing on dad's shoulders. Any of the stuff we've been used to seeing throughout our childhoods is like, everybody's indoors. Everybody's indoors. It's structured. It's paid for. They've got, like you said, they got the swag. They got the fresh courts ready to go, wax on. And they got the coaches. They got the position players. And what are we doing here? They're 11, 12 years old. Like, it's dramatic.
I'm thinking about this because I can tell you the absolute most fun. The thing that resonated with me, what you said, was the permission to like make a mistake, because I think this probably is a conversation for another day, but like the stress, the anxiety, the mindset stuff, the wellness stuff for mental health for kids, right? Like never thought it in that way of like, yes, the physical side, but if every time you go out there, someone is critiquing you, giving you feedback, telling you did this right, you did this wrong, that can wear you down. And the absolute most fun I had as a kid is we played with football every day, like every day for a couple years stretch. Maybe the summers, people would go on their little vacations or whatever, but we would put the sunflower seeds in the mailbox. We had the street all blocked up, like, other families get mad because they're trying to come down the street and we're in the middle of the street. And it was just like over the stop sign, over the street sign, that's a home run. Oh, I mean, we'd be out there arguing like pitcher's poison, whatever, like you were out, no, you weren't. But like it was competitive, it was fun. You could just be yourself, and it wasn't like a coach is telling you adjust your swing, do this, like we take that for granted because there wasn't all these other opportunities. But man, I had so much fun doing that. And that really, I think, kept my love of the sports. If, we were out there and dad or coach or whatever is trying to like show me how to swing, I'm just like, this is not enjoyable. This is not enjoyable. And I see people. So I'm at the gym every day. Sorry. I'm at the gym every day at 6 a.m. And there are teenagers, young kids who are there before me, either in the field or in the court, just practicing. Like they're not playing pickup. They're not doing 3v3 on the soccer field. They got the cones out. And I can tell you, I would not have been able to do that. I just wouldn't. Like, I would have been like, this is boring. This is totally boring. Like, I'd rather just not play if we're going to sit here and do some cone drills.
I agree with you 100%. And those are the same memories I've got, middle school, high school, unstructured play, especially over the summer where school wasn't in session, playing on the street, like you said, various sports. We had rollerblade hockey when I was growing up. We played basketball, played football, two-hand touch. We did all this stuff. And I remember I have these great memories where like we'd have to pause play. Somebody would yell out car and we'd all have to go to the sidewalk, wait for the car to pass by and then get back in and resume play. And then we'd have arguments about where the ball last was and who was holding it and this and that. I mean, it was a blast, man. It was a bonding experience. I'm still in touch with those friends of mine. It was a bonding experience. It was a huge part of my childhood growing up. It gave me an appreciation for sports. It gave me an appreciation for camaraderie. I'm sad to see that we're robbing our youth because you can't charge for that. That is priceless. You can't buy that. And it costs, it actually, trying to buy that makes it harder to obtain. As soon as you inject money into that paradigm, you lose it. It's vanished. I don't know.
Right, it's
We
corrupted.
really are missing that in terms of how to sort. I think it's kind of the magic potion that I think would help a lot. It would decrease the rate of injuries. It would decrease psychological, physical burnout. It would actually make you a better athlete.
Well, but so I think this gets at some of the things that I deal with when I advise people on like supplements and things like that. And I don't know if it's just a US thing or just a human thing, but people want like a system. Like, what's the system? Like, they don't actually really want to know the why and like all that. They just want to know, like, all right, we need to follow what steps to get to this goal. And there are tons and tons of people out there who can sell that system to you when, like, what you were describing, what I was describing about the wiffle ball, like, there's no system there. You just have to, like, have faith that, like, you'll get it over time just playing and having fun. And I think that concept of a system is what people are looking for. So I have this idea that I don't think I would ever do. So anybody listening to this is welcome to take it.
Oh man, you're giving some pre-reign here.
All right, so my kids go to this swim place and it's leveled up, and this is not novel at all, and maybe this already exists, but they do it at a bigger scale. So that you go in, let's say whatever, you're a minnow, and you have to do these skills to get through the minnow to get to like the lobster and then the shark or whatever, right? And the coach is checking you off, doing your skills. They're in. It's like you're in 30 minutes, you're out. I don't understand why that doesn't exist from a functional movement
Oh
standpoint where, you know
yeah,
what I mean? You've got
beautiful,
a six,
beautiful man. It's a
7-year-old,
great idea.
and
You want
I'm
somebody to
telling you,
take that?
I'm not gonna do it. But I'm telling you that it's like it doesn't matter the age, right? So let me just give you an example of like, let's just say you got to be able to skip 10 skips, whatever the criteria is. Okay, if you're 12 or you're 7 and you can't skip, you're in this section, whatever, not fish related, but right, you're in the whatever, the cheetah section. Doesn't matter how old you are. If you don't have that skill set, you cannot bump up to the next level, right? And then you just keep building on that, right? Like you have a sports exercise physiologist or movement specialist that's like, all right, here's our basics and we're going to work our way up. Can you do a squat with a broomstick? Like, can you do these things? I don't know, but you get the concept that it's
Yeah,
like,
totally. I get the concept.
it doesn't have to, hey, we're going to play dodgeball for 10 minutes. That's our warm up. Then we're going to get into the functional movements. Then we're going to show you how to stretch or whatever it may be. And you're out, right? Like it's 45 minutes, maybe 10 minutes changeover. And then the next group is in, boom, you go. That's how they do it on the swimming side. But I'm
Yeah.
like, I would just love to see something like that has nothing to do with winning or a structure. It's just like we're just developing movement. If people want more of a system, that's the thought I had.
What do you think of, so like I said, we started this conversation out by how I was concerned that we're going to screen out kids who might not have access to resources all the time. And that's already happening. But I'm kind of wondering, based on your idea, like maybe there's a way to structure physical education class in public schools where it incorporates that sort of in a systematic way. I know some schools already have like, you start the year off and you do like the mile and you do this. And like the point is by the end of PE, you're supposed to be able to be better than where you started. And I get the concept. But I wonder if there's a way to like, okay, every week you got to have all of the students in the class do it this way and evaluate them on a weekly basis to see, okay, they can do a half of a single leg squat without dynamic valgus. So they can do a jump and land and their knees don't cave in. They don't have over pronation of their feet. They can do a scapular shrug properly now while holding onto a pull-up bar. You can come up with good engagement of important muscle groups in a systematic way like you're describing and just hand it to a PE class teacher and have them sort of walk students through it. Of course, like don't make everything structured because that just defeats the whole purpose of having PE, but incorporate that in a systematic way to sort of use evidence to drive how to decrease risk of injury, not only in sports, but in activities of daily living and in life. Like that might be great for our kids. I don't even think I'm sure somebody probably has thought of that. Your idea is brilliant. I mean, it hasn't been instituted yet, but I think that would be a way to bring the access to people that otherwise wouldn't even have it. Because it's going to be hard to ask mom and dad who can barely afford to, catch the bus. It's going to be hard to convince them, hey, you got to take your kid to this place that does functional rehab for them, $30 for 30 minutes every 2 days. Whereas, no, they're going to do it in school. Don't worry about it. It's going to be taken care of.
Yeah, yeah, you're getting at a huge just, global health, like type of component because you would love to see, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like injury prevention per se, just that like
Optimizing
I
movement, maybe, might be a way to say it.
yes, because we know that like movement matters as you get older, right? So if we can have people exposed to, maybe it doesn't like from my standpoint, like, and I get they have these strength training classes, which I actually like. I'm a little bit cynical that it's like, hey, this is strength training class, but it's really part of football practice that just counts for your class. But
For your weightlifting
that's
credit or whatever.
yeah, like show exposing people to activities that are outside of tackle football, basketball, whatever, right? Like maybe that's the way you do the PE side of things where it's like, look, you know, we're not reinventing the wheel. There's probably a lot of smart people who are already looking at this, but just for the sake of conversation, maybe we're just ignorant to it, but like a more nuanced, like learning how to lift, do certain lifts, right? Like, hey, we need you to be able to graduate this class by be able to do 3 lifts with proper mechanics, understand how a treadmill works, understand, how exercise bike works, like things that you can then say, hey, you could go to the gym, show up, be confident, or, things around the house. Like, here's the band exercises that would be helpful for you. I think just building a knowledge base about movement would be helpful for people who just maybe like that's the thing they need to get into it. But it's a
I
hard
think
one. It's a hard one.
it's a hard one, and we talk about the money. Like if youth sports is a $40 billion industry, we should try to siphon off the excess there and fund programs like this that would actually address the issues we're seeing as a consequence of early sports specialization. Like I was just thinking while you were speaking, the way to incorporate it the way you discussed might be we now have the funds to hire more athletic trainers at schools so they can work with the PE coach or the PE teacher and like, so and so has a neck injury. Okay, well, go see the athletic trainer and they'll help you out. That's how you're going to do PE today. We're going to help your pain. We're going to help your injury. You got back pain? Let's go talk to the athletic trainer. You guys are all healthy? Okay, great. We're going to do these exercises today. We're going to go play this sport. Like that's where, you got to get qualified people who know how to help athletes and put them in a position to help succeed. And the money is just like totally flies in the face of that. It's totally disincentivized from producing a result that we think would actually work.
And not to say that PE teachers aren't qualified to work with athletes, but to the high level of what people are trying to do, like I think too, we're talking about maybe two different concepts. Like one is the overuse athlete that's super active, but also the maybe student who this is their like first foray in some type of physical activity, and we want them to
100%.
have a good experience with it, right? We want them to
100%.
like, it's not like, hey, we're going to put the basketball out there and you guys play basketball and all the people who know how to play are just going
Yeah,
to
they overtake the
dominate.
court. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. 100%. That
So
happens all the time. Yeah.
I think that's, I know this is a huge pivot in the conversation, but do you think that the NIL name, image, likeness is driving this one valuation is 40 billion valuation? Is it like, hey, we can sell this dream, we can sell this hope because on the other side of this, there is real money to be had that is very, very accessible. Whereas like if we were selling, you could go to the pros, like the numbers are pretty, unlikely for one individual person. But if the numbers are much dramatically improved to be able to get some NIL money, that's what I think could be a big driver here on the financial side of why people are willing to do what they have to do to get to that next level.
This is, I mean, to your point, the NIL situation, like what we're dealing with at youth sports at the high school level and even the middle school level is just the bleed over of the model of the NIL just entering high school. That's what we're dealing with. Like at some point, you're going to be able to point at this and say, this many thousands of kids in high school in the US pay into this system. And then the system will somehow reward. It's going to be like not a lottery because it's going to be merit based, but the top 10 performers are going to get paid out X amount of dollars. Like that's eventually what this is going to turn into if we just let this keep running down it's already kind of perniciously doing that, but it's going to become overtly doing that if we just allow this sort of waterfall effect to go unmitigated and unregulated down the line. So then
Well, I've got I got high school athletes, patients of mine who high school that have agents that like,
exactly.
yes.
Exactly. The volume of that is going to go up. Like sports agents are listening. They've been paying attention to this and like, okay, I realized that I was starting at 17. I got to backtrack it to 13 now. 13 is a sweet spot. And it's scary to me because I am going to be very worried when I walk into a patient room for a 14-year-old and it's mom, dad, the patient, and an agent sitting in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've got to consider, like you and I went through all of our training, went through med school, went through residency, went through fellowship. We worked with professional teams. We both chose, we don't like dealing with this situation. This is not where we get joy and excitement. We love it when the kids are hurt and they want to get back and we can guide them through it and make sure they're safe. We like that part. Let's go help the kids. Once the adult encroaches into the kids' world, everything goes haywire. Everything gets messed up. One of my favorite mentors who trained me when I was at fellowship said, when children are left to their own devices, they don't develop tendinitis because they have the good sense to stop when it hurts. When adults muck in their world, problems happen. And so that's kind of an encapsulation of what has been going on in the last 2 decades that I'm really trying to hedge and stop and dam up and start siphoning off all of these ridiculous things that we're doing. And the idea that kids who are barely going through puberty are paying to help guide their sports decisions is nauseating to me. It's absolutely nauseating.
So I think we were at a conference or something together when there was a discussion about something similar to this, and it triggered something into my mind. And I don't think I was the one thinking of it, but somebody said it. Let's say 6 and 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds were to come together and the like supervisor said, like, I want you guys to create a game that's fun and you enjoy. It would not be baseball, right? Like it would not be like they would, the 7-year-old would not say, okay, I am going to stand out here in the field and wait for you to hit the ball to me. It may never come to me. And then only one person gets to hold the ball at a time. And if we throw it to the other person and they miss, we have to go set all back up and wait more. Like that is not a game kids would come up with. So I just don't
If
see
they came
why.
up with a game, I think it would be close to something like tag, where there's a lot of constant excitement and moving around. And
Dodgeball.
not a lot of like waiting and anticipation. Dodgeball, yeah, that's another great example.
But this is the point I was, wanted to add to your point about the parents getting involved, or adults, not parents necessarily, but like, yeah, like when parents get involved, we have, 6-year-olds playing baseball where the majority of time they're just standing there. I don't have any problem with getting out and like getting familiar, but like it's very low yield in terms of building an athlete, in my opinion. And I just think about that a lot of like, like even my kids, like I try to take them out there to practice soccer. It was a disaster. Like I'm like trying to pass back and forth with them. Dude, we set up I made it up on the fly, this little obstacle course. They had to jump over this box and we had to save the alien from getting, eaten or whatever. 45 minutes later, they're like, all right, make another course, right? The little drills we did lasted about 2 minutes and they said they wanted to go inside. So, I mean, it's clear.
That's a great
It's clear.
encapsulation of this. Like it flies in the face of what kids want to do naturally. So why are we putting them in a box like this, especially when they're so young? Like they're going to learn a lot of valuable lessons and good memories that they'll have. And this is kind of what I sometimes the direction of my conversation with patients and parents go in like, well, the system is basically set up like we have to do this. Like we've got to commit them to this and we have to do it year round. And if we don't, like we may not be able to allow them to pursue this at the collegiate or professional level. Like we might miss the boat. And the first thing I try to approach that by saying like, look, all the evidence suggests that early sports diversification improves your ability to play sports at a high level later on, not early sports specialization. But most people groan at the evidence-based talk. So then I try to bring it back to the human level and I say, okay, look, they're 11. They're having injuries. I don't like the way that this is going. If at 18, they become a high-level athlete because you've been doing it this way, but it costs them their childhood. Is that worth the price? Is that really worth the price of them? Like they don't get that back. You can't go back in 7 years and say, now I'll do my childhood over again and I'll get to actually hang out with my friends and do free play and do this and do that instead of structured basketball or whatever. Was that worth the price? And I'm finding consistently more and more people are saying like, I never thought of it that way. Because most of the parents I treat are our age and I say, don't you have great memories of hanging out with your friends unstructured. Parents didn't know where you were. You were out at the park. You were throwing the football around. You were pretending you were Jerry Rice. You were pretending you were Joe Montana. He doesn't get that. Or she doesn't get that. She doesn't have that in her life anymore. Now it's coach says this, I got to do it this way. Like, we're robbing them of amazing memories and normal childhood development. Because at the end of the day, I tell parents and patients, I care about child well-being first. I'm pediatrics trained. I work in orthopedics. I love my job. I love sports. I love orthopedics. But I care about the well-being and healthcare of our children first and foremost. And the way that we are approaching how to address sports specialization in our kids doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense from an evidence standpoint. It doesn't make sense from a human standpoint. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean, I guess to bring it back full circle, do we have, and we, we don't plan these talks, just like free flowing conversations. So I know that, you haven't sat there and thought this out, but like, do we have a plan, a suggestion? Like, is there anything that, we can think of to just like, or are you like, hey, the cat's out of the bag. We just have to try to deal with the aftermath because nobody's, I guess, like, I'm rambling here. The like success stories that happen, all you need is one of those and it outweighs 50, 100 other, you know, I quit sports, hate sports, I win, I dropped out. Like, I just think
That's
that
really tough, because if a kid gets burned out at 15, when they're 35, they're still going to remember how terrible it felt to train for basketball. And a lot of the health exercises that you'd want a 35-year-old to be doing just to be in shape are going to be similar to what you do to be a good athlete when you're 15. And so they have such a bad taste in their mouth, like it's hard to convince them to stay active in their later lives because they just remember, like, listen, I'm done with that. That was a different part of my life. I don't want to get into that anymore.
there's
That's
no joy in it.
dangerous. There's no joy in that. And when we've robbed the joy out of that, man, that has some bad untoward side effects later on that are really scary. To your point, I don't have an easy answer. I don't have a simple answer. Whenever I have the opportunity to go one-on-one, I usually try to bring in examples of famous athletes who didn't early sports specialize and had success. And so MJ was a baseball player. LeBron played football. You got all these examples. And Nash, soccer athlete. You got players that played high-level sports and had long careers that didn't sports specialize early on. And so I try to bring that into conversation as much as I possibly can, as frequently as I possibly can. That helps a little bit, at least at the human level, try to relate. But yeah, we need a systematic overhaul of how we're approaching youth sports. And as we've started this conversation off, when the money is incentivized in a single direction, it's really hard to like course correct because that ship is huge. It's the Titanic and it's barreling down the Atlantic. And we don't have an easy way to just help it move and shift and avoid the iceberg, etc. I don't know. I don't have a good solution to it, but every month, every year, I feel like I'm seeing the repercussions of it. And it's heartbreaking. It's tough. I still love my job. It's interesting. And if I can change one person's perspective on youth sports at a young age to help them put them on the pathway to success, then it's really gratifying. But I don't know. Did you think, I thought my idea with stop talking about a dark period and start talking more about it like unstructured play, that might be getting at something.
Yeah, I mean,
That
if
might be something.
we combine the unstructured, unstructured sections or components to an athlete's calendar with like some early movement development, like focus on early movement development rather than like the rules of the game, type
Yeah.
of thing. Like,
Yeah.
I would say those are two big things. Like, I think kids under, let's say, 10, 11, like getting them away from things that have lots of rules and restrictions and heavy coaching in general. And then when you do get to a point where you maybe are a little bit more specialized, a little bit more mature in your skill set, being a little bit open to the unstructured stuff. Case in point, right? Like, if they were doing 7-on-7s at a park, having fun, I'm actually okay with that. I'm totally
Because you
okay
know
with
what?
that.
If they start hurting, they're going to stop.
Yes, yes.
And nobody's
And
going to tell them to keep going.
the mental stress of like making a mistake or whatever, right? It's just like, hey, we did the same skills. We threw the same passes, we caught the same balls, we ran the same plays, but there wasn't a coach there. I mean, what happened to before, like back in the day from like when I played soccer? You couldn't even, like, the coach couldn't even be at, it was called captain's practice. Like, and it was just pickup games. Like,
Yeah,
coach,
we got to
does
bring
that
back
still
captain's run
exist?
pack. I have no idea. That's a great question. I had captain's practices too. We got to bring that back. We got to bring back player-led scrimmages and all that sort of stuff.
Yes,
Because that
yes,
helps.
yes,
That's leadership. It's definitely, well, I mean, structured to some degree, but you get to make the
yes.
rules. And it also goes like the spectacular plays that we see from our most favorite athletes. A coach didn't tell them to do that. You know what I'm saying?
Great point, great point.
That insane, like, 3-fingered catch that Beckham had against I guess it was the Cowboys, the Eagles. I don't even remember now, but it was many years ago. But everybody remembers what I'm saying when I say it.
Mhm.
That insane catch was not because a coach said, you know what? What we're going to practice today is you're going to fly down the sideline, you're going to dive, and you're going to put out 3 fingers and trying to catch the ball. And that's how you're going to try to score a touchdown today, because it's somehow during some game at some point that might be
Mhm.
important. There's no way that happened. That was him backyard, just playing with friends, and something clicked from some memory back then, and his body was like, I remember I did something spectacular when I was younger, or I tried to do something spectacular. My body's just going to react. I'm going to try to do it that way. That memory that we have, that we get to cherish as spectators of the sport, was because he was allowed to just make mistakes and do free play when he was younger. And so I'm sure if he somehow listens to me saying this and he wants to correct me and say, no, you know what, I had a coach in high school that made me do it over, I'm glad I'm welcome to listen to that, and I'll I'll
Yeah.
reevaluate myself. But I've got my doubts that came from a coach. That came from being allowed to develop and play childhood sports unstructured in a way that you enjoyed with your friends.
Well, there you have it.
Oh, it's a good timing because I gotta do a bunch of stuff I gotta run and take care of.
Okay.